The fluorescent lights above Gate 47 hummed with that particular frequency that lives somewhere between sound and migraine. James Robinson sat in the molded plastic chair, his laptop balanced on knees that had seen 62 winters, and tried not to notice the way the young mother 3 seats down kept glancing at him. Not looking, exactly. Checking. The kind of visual audit people perform when they're trying to confirm a suspicion they don't want to admit they're entertaining. He'd seen that look before, countless times, in boardrooms where his net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations, in restaurants where the host assumed he was waiting for a table, not seated at the best one, in airports like this one, where a black man in a 15-year-old sweater and canvas sneakers apparently triggered some internal alarm system that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the reptilian brain. The sweater was Loro Piana. The sneakers were Brunello Cucinelli. Together, they cost more than most people's monthly rent. But they didn't announce themselves. That was the point. James had learned a long time ago that true wealth whispered. It was only insecurity that shouted. His phone buzzed. A text from Laura Bennett, his CFO. Board approved. $680 million wired tomorrow. You saved 12,000 jobs. Congratulations. James didn't smile. 12,000 jobs. 12,000 families. 12,000 people who would wake up tomorrow and go to work at Skyglide Airlines because James Robinson had decided their company was worth saving. None of them would ever know his name. Most of them wouldn't care if they did. That was fine. That was how he preferred it. The gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system, flat and mechanical. We are now beginning general boarding for Skyglide Flight 827 to New York LaGuardia. Passengers with disabilities or requiring extra time may board now. James closed his laptop. The acquisition would finalize tomorrow, pending one last signature. He'd fly to New York, meet with Michael Anderson, Skyglide's current CEO, and by noon the deal would be done. By afternoon, the press releases would go out. By evening, 12,000 people would breathe a little easier. He stood, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. The fabric was frayed at the edges. He'd been meaning to replace it for 3 years, never got around to it. His mother Dorothy had given it to him when he left for college in 1982. She'd saved for 6 months to buy it. Every time he thought about replacing it, he remembered her face when she'd handed it to him. Pride and worry and love all tangled together in a way that made his chest ache even now, 16 years after cancer had taken her. The line at the gate was already forming. James joined it, boarding pass on his phone screen, trying to ignore the way the businessman ahead of him kept shifting his briefcase from hand to hand, creating just a little more distance between them. Karen Phillips stood behind the gate counter, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. She was 45, blonde hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful, and she wore her 15 years with Skyglide like a badge of honor. She'd seen everything, dealt with everyone. Nothing surprised her anymore. When James stepped up to the counter, she glanced at his boarding pass, then at him, then back at the boarding pass. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "Sir, are you sure this is your ticket?" The question hung in the air between them. James felt something shift in his chest. Not anger, not yet, just a kind of weary recognition. "Yes, ma'am. I purchased it this morning." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. Not obviously, just enough that someone watching closely might notice. "It's just unusual. Can I see your ID and the credit card you used to purchase?" James reached for his wallet. Behind him, he could hear the line beginning to grow restless. Shuffling feet, cleared throats, the universal language of impatience. He handed over his driver's license and his American Express black card. Karen took them, held the card up to the light as if checking for counterfeits, then turned to her computer screen and began typing, and typing, and typing. 30 seconds became a minute. A minute became 2. The man behind James sighed loudly. "Is there a problem?" James kept his voice level, calm, the voice he used in board meetings when someone questioned his judgment. "I just need to verify the payment went through. Sometimes there are issues." Karen picked up her phone, spoke in a low voice James couldn't quite hear. He caught fragments: unusual transaction, and need supervisor approval, and just want to be sure. The line behind him had grown to 15 people. A baby started crying somewhere near the back. The businessman with the shifting briefcase checked his watch and muttered something James chose not to hear. 5 minutes. 10. Karen was still on the phone, still typing, still treating his boarding pass like it was evidence in a federal investigation. Finally, a man in a Skyglide supervisor vest appeared. He looked at James's documents, looked at James, looked at Karen. "What's the issue?" "Just verifying the passenger's payment. The ticket was purchased this morning for a significant amount." The supervisor scanned James's ID, tapped a few keys on the computer, then handed everything back. "Everything checks out. Have a good flight, Mr. Robinson." No apology, no acknowledgement of the 15 minutes James had just lost. No recognition that perhaps, maybe, there might have been absolutely no reason to question his ticket in the first place. James took his documents and walked toward the jetway. Behind him, he heard Karen greet the next passenger with a cheerful "Good morning" that sounded nothing like the suspicion she'd offered him. The jetway smelled like stale coffee and jet fuel. James walked slowly, letting the anger drain out of his shoulders, out of his jaw, out of the tight knot that had formed in his stomach. He'd learned decades ago that carrying anger was like carrying hot coals. You were the one who got burned. T.S. Checkpoint number 4 was having a slow morning. The line moved with the kind of grinding inefficiency that made air travel feel like punishment. James stood in his socks, belt in one hand, watching his backpack disappear into the X-ray machine. "Sir, step to the side, please." Officer Gary Miller stood at the end of the conveyor belt, one hand raised in the universal gesture of stop. He was 48. Ex-military bearing and the kind of crew cut that suggested he missed the structure of having someone tell him exactly what to do. Random screening, just routine. James stepped aside, watched 3 white passengers walk through behind him without a second glance. Watched Gary pull his backpack off the belt, unzip every pocket, remove every item. Laptop, charger, bottle of water he'd forgotten about, protein bar, the Louis Vuitton wallet his daughter had given him for his 60th birthday, leather so soft it felt like butter, the framed photo of Dorothy he carried everywhere, her smile frozen in 1998, before the diagnosis, before the chemo, when she still had hair and hope. "What's the purpose of your trip?" "Business meeting." Gary held up the laptop, turned it over in his hands like he'd never seen one before. "What kind of business?" "Technology consulting." "You have receipts for this laptop?" The question was so absurd, James almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he just looked at Gary, really looked at him, until the officer shifted his weight and cleared his throat. "It's procedure. High-value items. We need to verify ownership." "The laptop is 6 years old. I don't carry receipts for things I bought in 2020. Gary set the laptop down, moved on to the wallet, opened it, counted the cash inside. $300. Gary's eyebrows went up. "You always carry this much cash?" "Sometimes more." "Where'd you get it?" James felt that coal getting hot again, felt it burning through the careful calm he'd constructed. "I earned it." 20 minutes. Gary went through everything. Asked about the protein bar's expiration date. Asked why James had a photo of Dorothy. Asked if he had any documentation proving the wallet was his. The line behind the checkpoint had backed up into the terminal. Families with strollers, businessmen checking watches, an elderly couple holding hands, confused by the delay. Finally, Gary repacked the backpack. Not carefully, just shoved everything in, zipped it closed, handed it back. "Have a safe flight." No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that perhaps treating a 62-year-old man like a smuggler might have been, at minimum, unnecessary. James grabbed his bag and half walked, half ran toward his gate. The final boarding call had already been announced. He made it with 3 minutes to spare, breathing hard, sweat dampening his collar. The jetway was empty now, just James and the hollow echo of his footsteps. He stepped onto the plane, turned left toward first class, and felt the recycled air hit his face like a wall. Row 2, Seat A. Window. He'd paid for it specifically. James liked to watch takeoffs, liked to see the ground fall away and the world shrink to the size it actually was. It helped him remember that the problems that felt enormous at ground level were just tiny dots from 30,000 feet. He moved down the aisle. The plane was maybe half full. Most of the first-class cabin was empty. Just a couple in seats 2C and 2D, silver-haired and designer-labeled, the kind of people who looked like they'd been born in first class and couldn't imagine any other way to travel. Patricia Murphy stood near the cockpit, checking her tablet. She was 48, 18 years with Skyglide, and she took her job seriously. Safety, service, procedure, in that order, always. When James stopped at row 2, she looked up, saw him, saw his sweater, saw his backpack, saw everything except, apparently, the boarding pass in his hand. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong section. Economy is that way." She gestured toward the back of the plane with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. James held up his phone, showed her the boarding pass. Seat 2, a first class, paid in full. Patricia's smile flickered just for a second. Then she pulled out her tablet, scanned his barcode, watched the screen confirm what he'd just told her. That's surprising. Not, "I apologize for the confusion," not, "welcome aboard," just surprise. As if the idea of James Robinson in first class was somehow startling, somehow unexpected, somehow wrong. She moved aside without another word. James slid past her, stowed his backpack under the seat in front of him, and sat down. The leather was soft, the seat wide, the legroom generous. Everything he'd paid for. The couple in 2C and 2D were looking at each other now, whispering. The man's face had gone tight. The woman's eyebrows had climbed so high they'd nearly reached her hairline. James pulled out his laptop, opened his email, tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the acquisition documents that needed one final review. Tried to pretend he didn't hear the woman whisper, "Since when do they let?" before her husband shushed her quiet. The email from Michael Anderson sat at the top of his inbox. "Looking forward to finalizing tomorrow. This partnership will transform Skyglide. Thank you for believing in us." James believed in second chances. He believed in companies that had made mistakes but were willing to change. He believed in the 12,000 people who just wanted to keep their jobs and feed their families and didn't deserve to lose everything because executives had made bad decisions. What he didn't believe in anymore was that people would see him for who he was rather than what they thought he represented. His mother's voice came back to him, not a memory exactly, more like a presence, something that lived in his bones. "Baby, Some people will never see you. They only see what they fear. Dorothy Robinson had cleaned hotel rooms for 30 years. 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Bleach and industrial cleaner, and hands so raw they cracked in winter. She'd come home smelling like other people's lives, exhausted in ways that went deeper than muscle, and she'd still make dinner, still help James with homework, still smile when he told her about his day. One night, when James was 15, she'd come home crying. A guest had accused her of stealing a necklace, made her empty her pockets right there in the hallway, in front of other guests, in front of other staff, made her prove her innocence like she was on trial for a crime she hadn't committed. They'd found the necklace an hour later, behind the dresser, where it had fallen when the guest set it down carelessly, drunkenly, the night before. No apology, no acknowledgement. The guest had checked out that morning without a word. James had been so angry, young enough to think anger could change things, old enough to want to do something about it. Dorothy had sat him down at their kitchen table, taken his hands in hers. "Baby, you can't carry that rage around. It'll eat you alive. You want to change things? You work hard. You get powerful. And when you have power, you use it to make sure nobody else has to stand in a hallway emptying their pockets while strangers watch." 35 years later, James had the power, more than his mother could have imagined, more than she'd lived to see. The question that haunted him on nights when sleep wouldn't come was whether he was using it the way she'd wanted. The plane's engines hummed to life. Patricia Murphy walked down the aisle, checking seatbelts, closing overhead bins, performing the choreography she'd mastered over 18 years. When she passed row 2, she didn't look at James, didn't acknowledge him, just moved on to the couple behind him, smiled warmly, asked if they needed anything. James opened the email from Laura again, stared at the number, $680 million, wired tomorrow, final signature in New York, 12,000 jobs saved. He'd built Robinson Tech from nothing, a garage startup in 1991 when people were still figuring out what the internet was, let alone how to make money from it. 35 years of 18-hour days and missed birthdays and sacrifices that had cost him his marriage and nearly cost him his relationship with his daughter. But he'd built something real, something that employed 4,000 people directly and probably another 10,000 indirectly. Something that had made him wealthy enough that $680 million was significant, but not devastating. Something his mother had been so proud of, even though she'd never really understood what his company did. "My baby makes computers talk to each other," she'd tell her friends. Close enough. The plane pushed back from the gate. Outside the window, the ground crew moved through their routines, waving wands, checking wheels, guiding the plane backward with practiced precision. Patricia's voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're next for takeoff. Flight attendants, prepare for departure." The engines roared. The plane turned, taxied, joined the line of aircraft waiting their turn. Through the window, James could see heat waves rising off the tarmac, distorting the horizon, making everything shimmer and bend. 15 minutes into the flight, James heard the crying, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that cuts through every conversation and every pretense of privacy. A child in distress. He looked back. Rows behind him, in seat 18D, a young woman was holding a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4. The child's face was flushed red, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her small frame should contain. The woman, Angela Rivera, looked terrified. 32 years old, single mother, flying alone for the first time in 3 years because her mother had fallen and broken her hip, and somebody had to get to New York to help. Angela hadn't wanted to bring Sophia. Couldn't afford not to, couldn't afford the flight either really, but credit cards existed for emergencies, and this qualified. Sophia had been fine at the gate, fine during boarding, fine until 10 minutes after takeoff, when the fever that had been building all morning finally spiked and the little girl started burning up. Angela dug through her bag, found the children's Tylenol, found the measuring cup. No water. She'd finished her bottle at the gate. Hadn't thought to buy another. She pressed the call button. Once. Twice. Waited. Jessica Hayes appeared. 25 years old, 11 months with Skyglide, still trying to figure out if this job was a career or just a stopover on the way to something better. She saw the crying child, saw the frantic mother, and felt her training kick in. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" "I need water. My daughter needs to take medicine. Please, she's burning up." Jessica glanced at the Tylenol bottle, at Sophia's flushed face, at Angela's desperate eyes. "We'll start beverage service in about 20 minutes, ma'am. I can bring you water then." Angela's face crumpled, not crying yet, but close. "She's sick. She needs it now. Please, just a cup, anything." "I understand, but we're not able to serve beverages until the captain turns off the seatbelt sign. Safety regulations. It's just water." "I'm sorry, ma'am. You'll have to wait." Jessica walked away. Not cruel, not indifferent, just following the rules, just doing what she'd been trained to do. Safety first, procedure always. Angela held Sophia closer, whispered reassurances she didn't believe, and tried not to cry in front of her daughter. James had been watching, not staring, just aware. The way you become aware of a car drifting into your lane or storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He reached into his backpack, pulled out the bottle of Evian he'd bought at a kiosk after security. Expensive airport water, overpriced and unnecessary. He'd drunk half of it, screwed the cap back on, planned to finish it later. Sophia needed it more than he did. James unbuckled his seatbelt. The plane had leveled off. The seatbelt sign was off. Technically, he was allowed to move around the cabin. The man in seat 2B, Richard Montgomery, looked up from his Wall Street Journal. "Where are you going?" James didn't answer, just stood, moved into the aisle, walked toward the back of the plane. 17 rows. James counted them, counted the passengers who glanced up as he passed, counted the ones who looked away, counted the subtle shifts in posture, the slight tensing, the unconscious recalibration that happened when a 6-foot-tall black man walked down an airplane aisle. He'd counted these looks his whole life, stopped being surprised by them around age 12, stopped being hurt by them around age 30. Mostly. He stopped at row 18. Angela was still whispering to Sophia, still holding her, still trying to will the fever down through sheer maternal determination. "Excuse me." Angela looked up, saw James, saw the water bottle in his hand. Her eyes went wide. James held it out. "Your daughter needs this more than I do, ma'am." For 3 seconds, Angela just stared, like she couldn't quite process what was happening, like she thought maybe this was a trick and the punchline was coming any moment. Then her face broke, not crying, not yet, but close. She took the bottle with both hands like it was made of crystal. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much." James nodded, smiled, the kind of smile that said, "I'm a father too," without using words. "Hope she feels better." He turned to walk back to his seat, made it 3 steps. Patricia Murphy appeared from nowhere. That's how it felt anyway. 1 second the aisle was clear, the next second she was there, hands on hips, looking at James like a principal who'd caught a student passing notes. "Sir, you can't redistribute airline property." James stopped, turned, looked at her. "It's a bottle of water. First-class amenities are for first-class passengers only." "I am a first-class passenger." Patricia's jaw tightened, just barely, just enough. "Then please return to your seat and stop disrupting the cabin. James glanced around. The cabin was fine. People were reading, sleeping, scrolling through phones. The only disruption was this conversation. He walked back to row 2, slid past Richard Montgomery, who was now staring at him with unconcealed hostility, sat down, tried to focus on his laptop. Behind him, Sophia's crying had quieted. The Tylenol was working. Angela was whispering thank you over and over, even though James couldn't hear her anymore. Richard Montgomery folded his Wall Street Journal, set it in his lap, leaned slightly toward James. Always got to be the hero, huh? The words weren't loud, just loud enough for James to hear, just loud enough to make it clear he wasn't talking to himself. James's fingers paused on the keyboard, just for a second, just long enough to register the words. Then he kept typing. Richard leaned back, arms crossed, satisfied with whatever point he'd just made. Across the aisle, the silver-haired woman in designer labels looked over and smirked. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The look said everything. James felt that coal again, felt it burning, felt the heat of it spreading through his chest, his throat, his jaw, but he kept typing, kept his eyes on the screen, kept his breathing steady. Baby, you can't carry that rage around. 10 minutes passed. James worked on the acquisition documents, reviewed the terms, double-checked the numbers, made notes for tomorrow's meeting, did everything he could to pretend Richard Montgomery didn't exist. Then he heard it again. Sophia, crying louder this time, not the exhausted whimper from before. This was urgent, panicked, the kind of crying that sounds like pain. James looked back. Angela was holding Sophia, who had gone rigid in her arms. The little girl's eyes were rolling back. Her body was shaking. Angela's voice cut through the cabin. "She's having a seizure! Somebody help!" James was out of his seat before he'd consciously decided to move. 17 rows again, faster this time. He dropped to his knees beside Angela. "Lay her on her side. Loosen her clothes. She's having a febrile convulsion." His voice was calm, steady, the voice he'd used 1,000 times when his niece had epilepsy, when he'd been the one responsible for keeping her alive during seizures that looked like death, but usually weren't. Angela followed his instructions. Sophia's shaking began to slow, her eyes focused again. From the row behind, a voice. "He's right. I'm a doctor." Dr. Kenneth Parker, 68, retired pediatrician, 25 years in practice. He'd seen hundreds of febrile seizures. James had just handled it perfectly. "This man prevented choking. You did the right thing." Patricia Murphy appeared again. This time, she had company. A man in a captain's uniform, silver hair, potbelly, eyes that had seen 35 years of flight time and weren't impressed by much anymore. Captain Robert Taylor looked at James kneeling in the aisle, looked at Angela holding Sophia, looked at the passengers starting to crowd around, phones out, recording. "What's the problem here?" Patricia spoke before James could. "This passenger keeps leaving his seat. He's disrupting the cabin." Robert looked at James, really looked at him, sized him up in the way men of his generation had learned to size up certain people. Quick, efficient, final. "Sir, return to your seat. This is your final warning." James stood slowly, made himself tall, made himself look Robert in the eye. "The child needs medical attention. She just had a seizure. I'll decide what this cabin needs, not you." The words hung there, not shouted, not even particularly angry, just absolute. The kind of authority that doesn't ask, doesn't explain, doesn't compromise. James walked back to row 2, sat down, felt every eye in the cabin on him, felt the judgment, felt the assumptions being made, the stories being written, the conclusions being drawn. Richard Montgomery was smiling now, actually smiling. like he'd just won something. 5 minutes later, Richard unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, walked to the front of the cabin. Patricia met him there, and they spoke in low voices James couldn't quite hear. He caught fragments. "That seat. I want it. Diamond member. Deserve first class." Patricia glanced back at James, then at Richard, then at James again. 3 seconds of decision. That's all it took. She walked to row 2, stood over James. "Sir, we need you to move to another seat." James closed his laptop, looked up at her. "I paid for this seat." "We're upgrading another passenger. Operational necessity." "I have my boarding pass. I paid full fare. I'm not moving." Patricia's face went hard, not angry, just cold, the kind of cold that comes from absolute certainty. "Sir, if you refuse, I'll have to call security." Behind her, Richard Montgomery was already settling into seat 2A, James's seat, the seat he'd paid for, the seat he'd selected specifically because he liked the window view. James stood, not to comply, not to move, just to be at eye level when he said what came next. "I'm not refusing. I'm exercising my right to the seat I purchased." Patricia pulled out her radio. "Captain, we have a non-compliant passenger in first class. He's refusing crew instructions." Robert Taylor's voice came back over her radio. "Is he threatening anyone?" Patricia looked at James, sitting calmly, laptop closed, hands visible, no threat, no aggression, just a man who wanted the seat he'd paid for. "He's being non-compliant and intimidating." The word hung in the air. Intimidating. James Robinson, 62 years old, sitting quietly, was intimidating. Robert's voice, "I'm calling ground security for arrest upon landing. Get him moved to economy." Patricia pointed to the back of the plane. "Row 18, seat C, middle seat. Move, now." James looked at Richard Montgomery, comfortable in his stolen seat, looked at Patricia Murphy, righteous in her authority, looked at the passengers pretending not to watch while watching everything. He picked up his backpack, walked to row 18, slid into seat 18C, middle seat, between Angela, who looked horrified, and a businessman who immediately shifted as far away as the narrow seat would allow. Sophia had stopped crying. The seizure had passed. Angela was holding her, rocking her, whispering that everything would be okay. When she saw James, her face crumpled. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I'm so sorry." James shook his head. "No, ma'am, this is not your fault. Not even a little bit." He meant it, every word. The plane began its descent. Captain Taylor's voice over the PA. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." James pulled out his laptop one more time, opened his email, found the message from Laura Bennett about the acquisition. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. $680 million, 12,000 jobs. Michael Anderson's grateful email. The press releases ready to go. The signatures waiting in New York. All of it balanced against this moment, against Patricia's cold certainty, against Robert's unquestioned authority, against Richard's smug satisfaction, against the system that had looked at James Robinson and seen a problem instead of a person. Dorothy's voice again. "When you have power, you use it to make sure nobody else has to stand in a hallway emptying their pockets while strangers watch." James started typing. The email was short. 53 words that would change everything. To Laura Bennett, CFO, Board of Directors. Subject, immediate action required. Robinsonic Investment Cancellation Body. Effective immediately, cancel all proceedings for Skyglide Airlines acquisition. Do not transfer funds. Do not finalize contracts. This decision is final. I will explain when I return. JR. His finger hovered over the send button. He thought about the 12,000 jobs, the families, the people who had done nothing wrong, the mechanics and gate agents and pilots who just wanted to work and go home and live their lives. He thought about his mother emptying her pockets in a hotel hallway. He thought about every time he'd been stopped, questioned, searched, suspected, assumed guilty until proven innocent, and even then, not quite believed. He thought about Sophia, burning up with fever, and Jessica Hayes saying she'd have to wait. He thought about Patricia Murphy's surprise that he belonged in first class. He thought about Richard Montgomery stealing his seat with a smile. He thought about Robert Taylor deciding James was the problem without asking a single question. James clicked send. The email disappeared from his screen. Gone. Irrevocable. The plane touched down. Rough landing. The wheels hit hard, bounced once, settled. The engines reversed. The whole cabin shuddered. James closed his laptop, looked out the window at the terminal getting closer. In 15 minutes, everything would change. In 15 minutes, 5 people would learn that assumptions have consequences. In 15 minutes, the quiet man in the old sweater would remind them that power doesn't always announce itself. It just waits, and when it moves, it doesn't just shake the room. It collapses the entire building. The wheels locked. Rubber screamed against concrete. James felt the deceleration in his bones, that familiar pull forward against the seatbelt, the physics of arrival playing out exactly as it had 1,000 times before. The plane slowed, turned, taxied toward the gate with the grinding patience of something too large to hurry. Angela was crying quietly now, Sophia asleep against her chest, the fever broken, or at least temporarily subdued. She kept glancing at James, opening her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closing it again. Apology and gratitude tangled together in a way that couldn't find words. James looked past her, out the window. The terminal was getting closer. Ground crew in orange vests were already moving into position, guiding the plane with illuminated wands, their movements choreographed through years of repetition. His phone buzzed, a text from Laura Bennett. Email received, calling emergency board meeting. Are you certain? This will devastate them. James didn't reply. Certain wasn't the word. Certain implied doubt, followed by resolution. What he felt was something colder, something that had calcified over 62 years of moments exactly like this one. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around him, passengers erupted into the usual chaos of arrival. Overhead bins opening, bags being yanked down, everyone suddenly desperate to stand after sitting, to move after stillness, to escape the metal tube that had held them captive for 2 hours. James stayed seated, waited, watched Richard Montgomery in row 2 stand and stretch, completely comfortable in the seat he'd stolen, completely unaware that the man he'd displaced had just sent an email that would cost him everything. Patricia Murphy's voice over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York LaGuardia. Please remain seated until the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. Too late. Half the cabin was already standing. Patricia didn't bother correcting them, just started moving down the aisle, checking overhead bins, preparing for the next flight, the next set of passengers, the next routine day in a career built on routines. She didn't look at James as she passed row 18. Didn't acknowledge him, just moved on, her mind already somewhere else. The forward door opened. Passengers began shuffling out. James waited until the crowd thinned, then stood, grabbed his backpack, and stepped into the aisle. He made it 4 steps. Sir, we need you to remain seated. 2 men in airport security uniforms blocked the aisle. The younger one, Christopher Hayes, was built like he'd learned conflict resolution in a boxing ring. 42 years old, 12 years in airport security, and a face that suggested he enjoyed the authority his badge provided. The older one, Donald Freeman was 50, black, and looked deeply uncomfortable with whatever was about to happen. Christopher's hand rested near his belt, not quite on his handcuffs, but close enough to make the threat clear. "There's been a report of disruptive behavior. You need to come with us." James felt every passenger within earshot turn to look, felt their phones come out, felt the moment crystallize into the kind of story people would tell later, the details getting sharper with each retelling, until what actually happened mattered less than the narrative they'd constructed around it. "I'd like to leave voluntarily. I don't want any trouble." Christopher's jaw tightened, not because James had said anything wrong, because he'd said it calmly, because calm, in Christopher's experience, was just another word for dement. "You should have thought about that before you started causing problems. Hands behind your back." "I'm not resisting. I'll walk with you. You don't need handcuffs." "I'll decide what I need." "Hands, now." Donald Freeman shifted his weight, looked away, the universal body language of a man who knew something was wrong, but lacked the courage to say it. James put his hands behind his back, felt the cold metal click around his wrists, felt Christopher tighten them, not enough to break skin, just enough to hurt. "Officer, the cuffs are cutting circulation." "You'll survive." Christopher grabbed James's arm, yanked him forward. James stumbled, not because he was resisting, because sudden force plus human physics equals imbalance. "Don't resist." "I'm not resisting." Christopher pushed James toward the exit. James's shoulder hit the edge of an overhead bin. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate. He tasted copper, touched his tongue to his lip. Blood. Behind him, a teenager's voice cut through the cabin. "He's not resisting. Why are you hurting him?" Emily, 17, honors student, college applications already submitted, phone already recording everything. Christopher spun toward her. "Put that phone away, or you're next." Emily didn't stop filming. Her generation had grown up knowing that video was the only truth that mattered. Christopher yanked James down the aisle. Passengers pressed back against their seats. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A man put his arm around his wife. The businessman in 18D pulled his feet in like James might trip over them. Nobody intervened. Nobody spoke up. Nobody said, "Wait, maybe this is wrong." 127 passengers, 127 witnesses, 127 people who would later claim they'd thought something seemed off, but hadn't wanted to get involved. James stumbled again. His head struck an armrest. The world went bright and sharp. More blood, warm on his temple, running down toward his jaw. Angela Rivera watched from row 18, Sophia still sleeping against her chest. Tears ran down Angela's face. She opened her mouth, almost spoke, almost said, "He saved my daughter," almost. But Christopher Hayes was a man with a badge and a uniform, and the kind of authority that made speaking up feel dangerous. So Angela stayed silent, hated herself for it, would hate herself for it for months, would hate herself until she finally found the courage to tell the truth. James was dragged off the plane, down the jetway, into the terminal. The fluorescent lights were too bright. His vision swam. The blood on his temple was drying sticky. They walked him past Gate 47, where passengers, waiting for the next flight, stopped mid-conversation to stare. Past the Hudson News, where a clerk paused in the middle of ringing up a magazine. Past the bathroom, where a man washing his hands looked up, met James's eyes in the mirror, then looked away. The interrogation room was exactly what interrogation rooms always are. Small, gray, furniture bolted to the floor, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass, fluorescent lights that hummed just below the threshold of conscious hearing, but loud enough to make your head ache after an hour. Christopher pushed James into a chair, didn't uncuff him, just left his hands behind his back, circulation slowly dying, fingers going numb. The security chief arrived 10 minutes later. Thomas Wright, 58, 30 years in law enforcement before retiring to airport security. He'd seen everything, done everything, believed he could read people in the first 30 seconds of meeting them. He looked at James, saw the blood, saw the expensive laptop peeking out of the backpack, saw the contradiction, and chose to ignore it. You're being charged with interfering with flight crew, possibly assault. I helped a sick child. That's not a crime. The captain says you were disruptive and non-compliant. The captain is wrong. Thomas leaned back, arms crossed, the posture of a man who'd already decided and was just going through the motions. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say. I'd like to make my phone call. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Not surprised exactly, just mildly interested. You can call your lawyer from holding. I'm calling someone else first. Something in James's voice made Thomas pause, made him pull out his personal cell phone instead of the room phone, made him hand it over even though procedure said not to. James dialed with numb fingers, had to try twice before he got the number right. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice cheerful and unsuspecting. Michael Anderson. Michael, James Robinson. The cheer drained out of Michael's voice, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. James, are you calling about the acquisition? We're all set for tomorrow. Everything's ready. The board is... Ground Flight 827, now. Silence. Complete. The kind of silence that feels like falling. I'm sorry, what? Your crew just had me beaten and arrested. Your captain lied. Your flight attendant racially profiled me. Ground, the plane. Michael's breathing went ragged. James could hear him walking, could hear a door closing, could picture him in some private space, trying to process words that didn't make sense. James, you were on 827? Row 18C, middle seat, economy, because your crew decided my first-class seat should go to someone who looked like they belonged there. Oh my God, not a curse, a prayer. The kind people make when they realize they're standing at the edge of something terrible and gravity is about to take over. I'm 20 miles from the airport. The plane is probably taxiing for the return flight. You have 15 minutes to ground it. Get every executive to that gate and figure out how to convince me not to walk away from $680 million. James, please, I didn't know. 14 minutes now. James handed the phone back to Thomas Wright. The security chief's face had gone the color of old paper. Who did you just call? James leaned back in his chair, as much as the handcuffs allowed. The pain in his wrists was constant now, sharp, but manageable. The man who was about to save your employer from bankruptcy. 20 miles away, Michael Anderson was already running, not literally, but close. Down the hallway of Skyglide headquarters, past executive assistants who'd never seen him move that fast, into Laura Bennett's office without knocking. Laura looked up from her computer, saw his face, and immediately closed her laptop. What happened? James Robinson was on 827. Laura stood slowly, like standing too fast might shatter something. Our James Robinson? The acquisition James Robinson? Beaten, bloody, arrested. He just called me from airport security. The color drained from Laura's face. She was 52, had weathered 3 recessions and a bankruptcy filing, and nothing in her career had prepared her for this. Oh no. Oh God, no. Michael was already pulling out his phone, dialing the airport operations manager, pacing like a caged animal. Get every executive to gate 47. I don't care if they're in meetings. I don't care if they're off today. Get them there now. Laura grabbed her purse, her phone, her tablet. I'm calling legal. We need to drop all charges immediately. I'm calling the police chief. We need Robinson released. Now. They ran for the parking garage. Behind them, assistants were already making calls, pulling executives out of meetings, sending urgent messages that used words like emergency and immediately and career ending. 6 black SUVs left the Skyglide headquarters parking garage within 8 minutes. They moved through midday traffic like a funeral procession, urgent but not quite panicked. Everyone inside them trying to calculate how badly they'd just destroyed their own company. Back at LaGuardia, Flight 827 was preparing for its return to Chicago. The passengers had deplaned. The cleaning crew had worked through the cabin. Fresh passengers were beginning to board for the westbound leg. Captain Robert Taylor sat in the cockpit running through his pre-flight checklist, the same routine he'd performed 35,000 times over 35 years. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Just another day. His radio crackled. Skyglide, 827 tower, hold position. Do not taxi. Repeat, hold position. Robert frowned, keyed his radio. Tower, we're cleared for pushback. What's the issue? Stand by for updated instructions. Patricia Murphy was in the galley preparing for the westbound flight. She'd already forgotten about James Robinson, had already moved on to the next set of passengers, the next set of problems. What happened on the inbound flight was done. Over. Not her concern anymore. Her radio buzzed. The operations manager's voice, tight, with something that sounded like fear. Patricia, exit the aircraft immediately. Report to Gate 47 supervisor desk. She keyed her radio. I'm scheduled for the return flight. We're about to push back. Now, Patricia. The tone killed any thought of arguing. Patricia grabbed her bag and headed for the exit, confusion written across her face. In the cockpit, Robert's radio crackled again. Skyglide, 827, you are officially grounded. Do not push back. Do not taxi. Remain at gate until further notice. Robert keyed his mic. Tower, we need a reason. We have passengers boarding. Orders from your CEO. Direct. Non-negotiable. Robert sat back in his seat, hands still on the controls, mind trying to process what could possibly cause a CEO to ground a flight mid-operation. Equipment failure? Weather? Terrorist threat? He looked out the cockpit window and saw them. 6 black SUVs racing across the tarmac, ignoring every protocol, heading straight for Gate 47. He knew, in that moment, that whatever was happening was worse than any of those things. The SUVs stopped. Doors flew open. Michael Anderson hit the jetway running. Laura Bennett right behind him. 8 other executives scrambling to keep up. Michael burst into the gate area, saw the supervisor, saw Patricia Murphy standing there looking confused, saw passengers waiting to board, phones out, sensing something dramatic was unfolding. Where's Captain Taylor? The supervisor pointed to the plane. Michael ran down the jetway, Laura following, both of them breathing hard. They found Robert in the cockpit, still sitting at the controls, still trying to understand. Captain Taylor, come with me. Now. Robert turned, saw Michael's face, and whatever he was about to say died in his throat. Sir, I'm in the middle of... You're in the middle of nothing. Get out of that seat. The tone left no room for discussion. Robert unbuckled, stood, followed Michael and Laura back down the jetway. The gate area had filled with Skyglide executives, operations managers, legal counsel, the VP of Customer Relations, everyone who might possibly be needed to fix whatever catastrophe was unfolding. And then James Robinson walked in. He'd been cleaned up. Someone had brought him a suit. Tom Ford, perfectly tailored. The kind of suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His temple was bandaged. His wrists were raw from the handcuffs, but he stood straight, shoulders back, looking every inch like what he was. The transformation was complete. The man they'd dismissed, the man they'd moved to economy, the man they'd beaten and arrested. That man was gone. In his place stood James Robinson, founder and CEO of Robinson Tech Industries, net worth $8.3 billion, the man who'd been about to save their jobs. Michael Anderson walked toward him, hand extended, face the color of ash. "Mr. Robinson, James didn't take his hand, just looked at him, really looked at him. Let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then painful, then unbearable. Finally, Michael's hand dropped. "I owe you an apology. What happened on that flight was unacceptable, inexcusable. We've already begun—" "Captain Taylor." James's voice cut through Michael's apology like a knife. Robert Taylor stepped forward, still in his uniform, still trying to project authority, even though everyone in the room could see it crumbling. "You told security I was disruptive and non-compliant, that I intimidated your crew. Would you like to explain to Mr. Anderson exactly what I did that was so intimidating?" Robert's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You were moving around the cabin, ignoring crew instructions. I helped a 4-year-old girl who was having a seizure. Is that what you considered disruptive? You refused to stay in your seat when instructed, after your flight attendant gave my seat to another passenger because she didn't think I belonged in first class. The words landed like grenades. Michael's eyes went wide. Laura Bennett pulled out her tablet, already pulling up the passenger manifest, the seat assignments, the evidence that would either confirm or deny what James was saying. As she found it in 30 seconds, her face went from pale to gray. "Captain Taylor, Mr. Robinson was assigned seat 2A first class, paid in full. Our records show he was moved to 18C economy, middle seat." She looked up at Robert. "Why?" Robert looked at Patricia Murphy. Patricia looked at the floor. Laura's voice went cold. "Why was a first-class passenger moved to economy?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. "Another passenger requested the seat." "And you just gave it to him, without asking Mr. Robinson, without any operational necessity?" Silence. Michael turned to James, and the look on his face was the look of a man watching his career end in real time. "Mr. Robinson, on behalf of Skyglide Airlines, I offer my deepest, most sincere apology. What happened to you was wrong, unacceptable. We will make this right." "Will you?" The question hung there, not rhetorical, not sarcastic, genuine. Michael nodded, desperate. "Yes, absolutely, whatever it takes." James reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, opened his email, turned the screen toward Michael. "Then explain how you're going to make this right for the 12,000 employees who are about to lose their jobs." Michael squinted at the screen, read the email, read it again. The blood drained from his face so fast, Laura actually reached out to steady him. You canceled the acquisition? Effective immediately. My board has already been notified. The wire transfer has been stopped. Our legal team is reviewing all contracts for termination clauses." Michael's legs gave out. He sat down hard in the nearest chair, hand over his mouth, eyes unfocused. Laura stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mr. Robinson, please. I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But 12,000 people, families, they had nothing to do with this. I know, and I'm truly sorry they're going to suffer, but that's not my responsibility. That's his." James pointed at Michael, who was still sitting, still processing the magnitude of what he'd just lost. "I'm the CEO of this company. You hired people who treated a passenger with contempt and violence. You created a culture where crew members felt comfortable profiling someone based on nothing but appearance. You built a system where my complaints about Patricia Murphy, and yes, I checked, there are 12 of them over the past 5 years, were documented and ignored. You had chances. You had warnings. You chose profit over people, over and over again. Michael looked up, tears actually forming in his eyes. We'll fire them, everyone involved. Taylor, Murphy, the security guards, everyone. We'll implement new training, new oversight, new policies. Please, just give us a chance. You've had chances. James turned to Robert Taylor, who stood rigid, face red, hands clenched into fists. Captain Taylor, you told security I was being intimidating. Do you want to know what's actually intimidating? Having a pilot use his authority to have a passenger beaten and arrested because he helped a sick child. That's intimidating. That's the abuse of power that makes people afraid to do the right thing. Robert's voice came out, strangled. I didn't know who you were. That's the problem. You should have treated me with dignity, regardless of who I was. The words hit like a physical blow. Robert actually stepped back like he could escape them. Laura Bennett cleared her throat, pulled out her tablet. Mr. Robinson, I've been reviewing our complaint records. We have 47 documented incidents over the past 8 years. Passengers complaining about being profiled, discriminated against, treated as suspicious or unwelcome. Patricia Murphy appears in 12 of these complaints. Captain Taylor appears in 8. We documented every single one. We did nothing. She looked at Michael, and the accusation in her eyes was clear. We prioritized customer retention over policy enforcement. We told ourselves these were isolated incidents. We were wrong. James nodded slowly. 47 people tried to tell you. 47 times you could have fixed this. Instead, you documented their pain and filed it away. Made them feel like the problem was them, not your company. Michael stood, walked toward James, hands raised in supplication. Tell me what I have to do. Please, name it, anything. James pulled up a list on his phone, started reading. Dr. Brenda Washington, black surgeon, accused by your crew of stealing headphones she owned, removed from the flight, missed her mother's funeral. Michael's face crumpled. Timothy Brooks, black software engineer, removed from first class because another passenger claimed he smelled like marijuana. He doesn't smoke, never has, drug tested clean. Your crew didn't care. Laura was typing frantically, pulling up each case, her face getting paler with each one. Maria Santos, Latina teacher. Your flight attendant told her the chicken dish she ordered wasn't authentic for her anyway. Made her feel like she didn't belong. She stopped flying altogether after that. James looked up from his phone. 47 people, Michael. 47 chances. And you did nothing until one of them turned out to have the power to hurt you back. The FBI agents arrived then. 2 of them, badges out, faces professional and neutral. The older agent looked around the gate area, at the executives, at Patricia and Robert, at Christopher Hayes, who'd been escorted up from security. We're here to take custody of several individuals for questioning regarding civil rights violations and assault. Patricia Murphy made a sound that wasn't quite a scream. Christopher Hayes went rigid. Robert Taylor closed his eyes. The agents moved efficiently. Handcuffs clicked. Miranda rights were read. The same process that had been inflicted on James was now being inflicted on the people who'd ordered it. Patricia was crying. Actually crying, tears streaming down her face, mascara running. I didn't know who he was. James watched them being led away, felt nothing, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a cold certainty that this was necessary. Richard Montgomery appeared from somewhere in the crowd of passengers. He'd been waiting for the return flight, completely unaware of what his seat theft had triggered. One of the agents turned to him. Richard Montgomery, you're wanted for questioning as well. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Richard's face went from confused to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. What? I didn't. I just asked for a seat. I'm a Diamond member. You can't. The agent didn't argue, just read him his rights and led him away. Emily, the 17-year-old who'd filmed everything, stood near the gate, watching it all unfold. She'd already posted her video, already watched it hit 10,000 views, then 50,000, then 200,000. By tomorrow, it would be 20 million. The video showed everything: James helping Sophia, Patricia's confrontation, Robert's cold dismissal, Christopher's brutality, the blood, the handcuffs, the way 127 passengers had watched and done nothing. Michael Anderson sat down again, head in his hands. We're finished. The stock is going to crash. Investors will pull out. We won't survive this. Laura Bennett sat beside him, equally shattered. We don't deserve to. James stood above them, these people who'd had the power to prevent all of this and hadn't. You're not finished yet, but you're going to have to earn your survival, and it starts with understanding that every person who walks onto your planes deserves to be treated like a human being, not a potential threat, not a problem to be managed, a human being. He turned to leave. Made it 3 steps. Michael's voice stopped him. What would it take? For you to reconsider? James turned back, looked at this man who'd just lost everything and was trying to find some way to climb back up. Nothing. There's nothing you can do, because I've learned that people don't change because they've been convinced. They change because they've been hurt, and you haven't been hurt enough yet to actually change. But 12,000 employees? We'll find new jobs, or they won't. Either way, that's the consequence of working for a company that built its culture on looking the other way. I'm sorry for them, I truly am, but I'm not the one who destroyed their livelihoods. You are. James walked away, down the jetway, into the terminal, past the Hudson News, where the clerk was now showing customers the viral video on her phone, past the bathroom where men were clustered around a tablet, watching, commenting, judging. His phone buzzed. Text from Laura Bennett, his CFO. Board meeting in 30 minutes. They want to know if you're certain. James typed back. Absolutely certain. This stands. Another buzz. This time from his daughter, Rebecca. Dad, I just saw the video. Are you okay? I'm on my way to NYC. He typed, I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't come. I'll be home tonight. But he wouldn't be fine. Not really. Because winning doesn't erase the humiliation of being dragged off a plane bleeding. Justice doesn't heal the wound of being treated like a criminal for helping a child. He'd learned that lesson at 15, watching his mother empty her pockets in a hotel hallway. Some wounds don't heal. They just teach you to carry them better. James found a quiet corner of the terminal, sat down, opened his laptop, began drafting the statement his PR team would release in the morning. It started with 5 words that would define everything that came next. Dignity is not for sale. The video hit 10 million views by midnight, 20 million by dawn. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, Emily's footage had been downloaded, re-uploaded, dissected, and transformed into the kind of cultural flashpoint that defines a moment. The comments section became a battlefield. Thousands of people who'd never met James Robinson suddenly had opinions about what he should have done, what he'd done wrong, whether canceling the acquisition was justice or cruelty. But the video didn't lie. Christopher Hayes tightening those handcuffs, the blood on James's temple, Patricia Murphy's face when she'd seen his first-class boarding pass and decided it must be wrong somehow. Robert Taylor's absolute certainty that his authority mattered more than the truth. 127 witnesses, 127 people who'd watched it happen and pulled their feet in. The cable news networks picked it up at 6 a.m. By 7, James Robinson's face was on every morning show, every news ticker, every social media feed. Not the James in the Tom Ford suit who'd stood in that gate area radiating quiet power. The James from the video, bleeding, handcuffed, stumbling down the aisle while passengers filmed and did nothing. CNN ran a Chiron, billionaire CEO, beaten, arrested after helping sick child on flight. Fox Business went with Skyglide loses $680 million after racial profiling incident. MSNBC found Angela Rivera, put her on camera at 8:15, Sophia sleeping on her lap, still recovering from the fever that had started everything. Angela's voice shook as she spoke. "He saved my daughter. The flight attendant told me I had to wait. My baby was burning up, and they told me to wait. And this man, this kind, generous man, he just gave her water. No questions, no hesitation. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped." The host leaned forward, voice gentle. "Did you know who he was?" "No, not until I saw the news. But it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. He was just a person being kind to another person. That should be enough. What do you think about what happened to him?" Angela's eyes spilled over. "I think they punished him for being good, and I think—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I think I should have spoken up. When they came for him, when they put those handcuffs on him, I should have told them. But I was scared, and my silence made me part of it." The clip went viral on its own. Angela's guilt, her honesty, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, living proof that James Robinson's kindness had mattered. Skyglide's stock opened at $42, dropped to $38 by 9 a.m., 29 by 10, 16 by noon. Trading was halted at 1 p.m. when it hit $12 and triggered the circuit breakers. Investors were fleeing. Corporate contracts were being canceled. Pilots and flight attendants were updating resumes, reaching out to competitors, trying to jump from a ship that was actively sinking. Michael Anderson sat in his office watching the stock ticker like a man watching his own death in slow motion. Laura Bennett was on the phone with the board, trying to explain how they'd managed to lose $680 million and their reputation in the same day. The explanation was simple. They'd hired Patricia Murphy despite complaints, promoted Robert Taylor despite warnings, created a culture where profiling was documented but not punished, built a system that protected employees who generated revenue and ignored passengers who didn't. And now the bill was due. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Michael wasn't invited. That told him everything he needed to know about his future with the company. At 3 p.m., the chairman called him. "Michael, the board has asked for your resignation, effective immediately." Michael had expected it. Didn't make it hurt less. "I understand. You'll receive your contracted severance. Legal will handle the transition." The line went dead. 32 years with Skyglide, 12 as CEO. Ended with a phone call that lasted 19 seconds. Michael packed his office in boxes, found the photo from 1998, Skyglide's first 787 delivery, him young and hopeful, standing beside the aircraft with the whole future ahead of him. Wrapped it in newspaper, sealed the box, walked out past assistants who wouldn't meet his eyes. The board appointed Dr. Brenda Washington as interim CEO that same afternoon. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The surgeon who'd been accused of stealing headphones she owned. The woman who'd missed her mother's funeral because Skyglide's crew had profiled her. Now she was running the company. Her first action was a press conference, 4 p.m., carried live on every major network. Brenda stood at a podium, no notes, just conviction. I'm standing here because James Robinson forced this company to look at what it had become, not what it claimed to be, what it actually was. A place where appearance mattered more than character, where assumptions mattered more than evidence, where maintaining the status quo mattered more than doing what was right. She paused, let the words settle. I'm implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. One complaint, one investigation, one consequence. No more documentation without action. No more benefit of the doubt for employees who've received multiple warnings. No more protecting our image at the expense of our passengers' dignity. A reporter shouted a question. What about the 12,000 employees? How do you save their jobs without the Robinson acquisition? Brenda's face tightened. I don't know yet, but I know this. We don't deserve to be saved if we're not willing to change. And real change costs something. Sometimes it costs everything. The press conference lasted 30 minutes. Brenda answered every question, didn't hide, didn't deflect, didn't blame the individual employees when the system itself was broken. By 5 p.m., she'd fired Patricia Murphy. Robert Taylor, Christopher Hayes, and Richard Montgomery's complaints had resulted in his permanent ban from Skyglide. Their personnel files were turned over to the FBI. Their careers were over, but that was just the beginning. The FBI investigation moved fast. Agents pulled 8 years of complaint records, interviewed 47 victims, built a pattern that showed systematic discrimination across multiple hubs, multiple crews, multiple flights. Patricia Murphy sat in an interrogation room at 6 p.m., lawyer beside her, trying to understand how her career had ended in federal charges. The agent across from her laid out photos. 12 different passengers, 12 different flights, 12 complaints where Patricia had profiled, questioned, or removed someone based on nothing but appearance. You want to explain the pattern, Ms. Murphy? Patricia's voice came out small. I was doing my job, following protocol. Which protocol requires you to question a passenger's ticket 3 times before accepting it's legitimate? Silence. Which protocol says you give a paid first-class seat to another passenger without asking the original occupant? More silence. Which protocol allows you to label a passenger intimidating when he's sitting quietly at his seat? Patricia's lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Patricia shook her head, tears streaming. I didn't know who he was. The agent leaned back, arms crossed. That's not a defense, Ms. Murphy. That's the whole problem. The trial would take 9 months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Video evidence, 127 witnesses, 47 prior complaints, a pattern so clear even the most skeptical jury couldn't ignore it. Patricia Murphy was convicted of civil rights violations, sentenced to 2 years federal prison, served 14 months, lost her house to legal fees. Her husband filed for divorce during the trial. Her daughters stopped calling. When she was released, she applied to every airline, every hotel, every customer service position within 50 miles. Nobody would hire her. Her name was poison. Google her, and the first result was Emily's video. 10 million views of her worst moment, frozen forever. She ended up at a truck stop diner off I-80, night shift, $9 an hour, serving coffee to long-haul drivers who sometimes recognized her, sometimes didn't, but either way left small tips that barely covered gas. One night, 3 months into the job, a black family came in. Father, mother, 2 kids. They sat in her section. Patricia's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the order pad. The father ordered pancakes for the kids, coffee for himself and his wife, smiled at Patricia like she was a person, not a viral video-made flesh. When they left, They tipped $5 on a $22 check, more than 20%, more than Patricia deserved, more than she could bear. She cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes, couldn't explain why, couldn't articulate the weight of receiving kindness from the very people she'd spent 18 years viewing as threats. Some lessons arrive too late to save you. They just arrive late enough to make sure you understand exactly what you lost. Robert Taylor's fall was faster. The FAA suspended his license the day after his arrest. The pilots' union expelled him within a week. 35 years of seniority, of perfect safety records, of flights logged across 6 continents erased because he'd decided his authority mattered more than a passenger's humanity. His trial was shorter than Patricia's. 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Captain's logs, where he'd documented James as non-compliant and potentially dangerous, despite video showing James sitting quietly. Radio transmissions, where he'd authorized the arrest without ever asking what James had actually done. The jury convicted him in 4 hours, 3 years federal prison for assault and civil rights violations. His wife filed for divorce before sentencing. His pension was revoked. $1.2 million he'd been counting on for retirement, gone. His 3 daughters sent a joint letter telling him they were changing their last names, didn't want to be associated with him anymore. Robert served 20 months, got out on good behavior, applied to every regional airline, every cargo carrier, every charter service. Nobody wanted a captain who'd gone viral for racial profiling and assault. He ended up driving an airport shuttle bus, same airport where he'd commanded aircraft worth $200 million. Same tarmac he'd taxied across 35,000 times. His former colleagues saw him, avoided eye contact, pretended not to recognize the man who'd once been their union representative, their mentor, their friend. One afternoon, a passenger getting on the shuttle looked at Robert, really looked at him, then pulled out his phone, started scrolling, found something, got off the shuttle without a word. Robert knew what he'd found, knew his face was permanently stamped onto that moment, knew he'd spend the rest of his life being recognized for the worst thing he'd ever done. He drove the shuttle route, airport to rental car center to hotel district back to airport, over and over, a loop as endless as his regret. Christopher Hayes got 4 years. The video of him tightening the handcuffs when James asked him to loosen them, the moment he'd pushed James and caused the head injury, the blood, the brutality. All of it captured in high definition from 3 different angles. His police pension was revoked. His wife took the kids and moved to California, changed the kids' last names to her maiden name, told them their father was dead. Easier than explaining he was in federal prison for assault under color of authority. Christopher served 3 years, applied for security jobs when he was released. Shopping malls turned him down, banks turned him down, schools definitely turned him down. He worked warehouse night shifts, $14 an hour, loading trucks, moving boxes, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize him. One night, the warehouse hired a new supervisor, Emily, the 17-year-old who'd filmed everything, now 23, fresh out of college with a degree in criminal justice. She recognized Christopher immediately. He saw the recognition in her eyes, waited for her to fire him, to use her power the way he'd used his. Instead, she just nodded, assigned him to a different shift, never mentioned it, never brought it up, never weaponized his past against him. That kindness was somehow worse than punishment. It forced Christopher to carry his guilt without the relief of martyrdom, forced him to live with what he'd done without the comfort of claiming victimhood. Some nights he wished she'd just fired him. Richard Montgomery's destruction was financial. His investment firm terminated him the day the video went viral. Liability risk too high, reputation too damaged. The lawsuit James had filed, $2.3 million for conspiracy to deprive civil rights, wiped out Richard's savings. His wife divorced him, took the kids, the house, most of the assets. His country club membership was revoked. His friends stopped calling. Richard was convicted of conspiracy, served 12 months. When he was released, every financial institution had blacklisted him. His Series 7 license was revoked. His CFA charter was suspended. He sold insurance door to door, made enough to rent a one-bedroom apartment in a building where the heat sometimes worked and the elevator never did. One day, 18 months after his release, Richard went to buy a plane ticket. Not Skyglide. They'd banned him for life. Another airline. He stood at the counter, credit card ready. The agent smiled. "Mr. Montgomery, you're confirmed in economy, middle seat. Don't you have first class available?" "It's full, sir." Behind Richard, a black man in a hoodie and sneakers approached the counter. The agent's face lit up. "Mr. Williams, welcome back. We've upgraded you to first class as usual. Thank you for your loyalty." Richard watched the man walk toward the gate, watched him disappear into first class, understood finally what it felt like to be judged by appearance and found wanting. The irony tasted like ash. Karen Phillips, the gate agent who'd spent 15 minutes questioning James's ticket, was fired within a week. Couldn't find another airline job. Ended up managing a cell phone store. Minimum wage, no benefits. She watched James Robinson on TV receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom 9 months later. Turned off the television. Couldn't bear to watch the man she'd treated like a criminal being honored by the President of the United States. But the individual karma was just the surface. The real change went deeper. The FAA issued new guidelines 6 months after the incident. The Robinson Protocol, they called it. Mandatory bias training for all flight crew. Third-party oversight boards at every major airline. Anonymous complaint systems with guaranteed investigations. Congressional hearings followed. James testified for 4 hours, calm, measured, devastating. The question isn't why I canceled the acquisition. The question is why it took a billionaire getting beaten and arrested for anyone to care about the 47 people before me who filed complaints and were ignored. Senator Karen Hughes leaned forward. "Mr. Robinson, do you regret your decision? 12,000 people lost their jobs." James didn't hesitate. "I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret the decision. Those 12,000 people worked for a company that systematically discriminated against passengers for 8 years. A company that documented abuse and did nothing. They lost their jobs because their executives failed them, not because I refused to reward that failure. But surely you could have accepted their apology, given them a chance to reform." "Senator, they had 47 chances to reform. They chose not to take them. Why should I believe the 48th time would be different just because this time the victim had money?" The hearing room went silent. No good answer existed. Everyone knew it. Congress passed the Airline Passenger Dignity Act 3 months later. Bipartisan, unanimous in both chambers. The president signed it with James standing behind him, Angela Rivera beside him, holding Sophia, now healthy and happy. The law mandated federal oversight of airline complaint systems, required public reporting of discrimination complaints, established a passenger Bill of Rights with teeth. 40 other airlines adopted Skyglide's zero-tolerance policy voluntarily. Not because they suddenly cared about justice, because they were terrified of becoming the next viral disaster. Discrimination complaints dropped 64% in 2 years. Not because discrimination stopped, because consequences started. 2 years after the incident, James returned to LaGuardia, same terminal, different airline. He'd never fly Skyglide again, even though Dr. Brenda Washington had turned it around, made it the highest-rated airline for diversity in the country. Some wounds heal, some don't. James's relationship with Skyglide fell into the second category. He stood at the gate, waiting to board, wearing the same old sweater, the same canvas sneakers, the same backpack with frayed edges. A young black woman approached him, 25, flight attendant uniform, crisp and new, name tag, reading Michelle. "Excuse me, Mr. Robinson?" James turned, cautious. Fame had made simple interactions complicated. "I just finished the Robinson Foundation's training program. Because of you, I know how to see people, not profiles. People, not threats, just people." Her voice caught. James felt something shift in his chest. "That's good. Thank you for telling me." "No, sir, thank you. My mom was a housekeeper, like your mother. She raised me the same way, taught me the same lessons. And now I get to carry those lessons into my work because you made sure the industry had to change." James's eyes burned. He blinked hard. "Your mother would be proud. So would yours." They stood there for a moment. Two people connected by the same history, the same lessons, the same understanding that dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you give. The boarding call came. James walked down the jetway, found his seat. Row 12, economy. He'd purchased first class, chosen to fly economy instead. An elderly white woman sat in the window seat. She smiled as James sat down. "Good morning." "Good morning." Simple, human, the way it should always have been. The plane took off. James pulled out his laptop. The wallpaper was a photo of Dorothy Robinson in her housekeeper uniform, smiling at the camera, pride and exhaustion mixed in her eyes. He touched the screen gently, whispered words only he could hear. "I did it, Mama. Mama, I stayed true. That's all you ever asked." The plane climbed. The city fell away below. James looked out the window at the world shrinking to its actual size. His phone buzzed. Text from Laura Bennett, his CFO. The Robinson Foundation just received its largest donation yet, $50 million from an anonymous donor. Note attached, for the next generation who won't have to bleed to be believed. James smiled, closed his laptop, leaned back in his seat. He'd lost nothing that mattered. The $680 million? Just money. It would come back. It always did. But what he'd gained was permanent. A system that worked differently. A culture that valued dignity. A generation of flight attendants like Michelle who'd been trained to see people instead of profiles. That couldn't be bought, only earned. The cost had been high. 12,000 jobs, 4 people's careers, a company's near destruction, his own blood on an airplane floor. But some things are worth the price. Some fights matter more than the casualties. James Robinson had learned that lesson in a hotel hallway at 15, watching his mother empty her pockets while strangers judged her guilty. He'd spent 47 years building the power to make sure nobody else had to learn it the same way. The money he'd walked away from would save other companies, create other jobs, fund other dreams. But the dignity he'd protected by walking away? That was priceless. That was permanent. That was the only inheritance that actually mattered. The plane leveled off at 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around James, passengers unbuckled, settled in, began the small rituals of flight. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody questioned his presence. Nobody assumed he didn't belong. Just a man in an old sweater, flying economy, carrying his mother's backpack and his mother's lessons and the quiet knowledge that power isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the dignity you protect when protecting it costs you everything. 3 rows ahead, a young mother struggled with a crying baby. The flight attendant offered water without being asked, smiled genuine warmth, saw a person who needed help and helped. Simple, human, the way it always should have been. James closed his eyes. Let the engine noise wash over him. Let the altitude steal his breath the way it always did. Somewhere below, Skyglide was rebuilding. Dr. Brenda Washington was creating something better from the ashes. Patricia Murphy was serving coffee at 3 a.m. Robert Taylor was driving a shuttle bus. Christopher Hayes was loading trucks. Richard Montgomery was selling insurance nobody wanted. And 12,000 employees had scattered to 40 other airlines, carrying with them the knowledge that culture matters, that choices have consequences, that looking the other way isn't neutral, it's complicit. The system had changed because one man refused to accept that his dignity was negotiable, refused to believe that kindness deserved punishment, refused to save a company that had systematically failed the people it was supposed to serve. That refusal cost him $680 million. It bought him something worth infinitely more. The plane began its descent toward Chicago. James opened his eyes, looked out at the city approaching, at the airport where this had all started, at the gate where he'd been questioned, searched, profiled, and dismissed. He would never forget, would never stop fighting, would never accept that people like Patricia Murphy and Robert Taylor were anomalies instead of symptoms. But he would also never stop believing that change was possible, that people could learn, that the next generation could be better if someone forced them to be. The wheels touched down. Smooth landing this time. No drama, no blood, no handcuffs, just a man arriving home, carrying his mother's legacy, having honored it in the only way that mattered, by refusing to sell his dignity at any price, by understanding that real power doesn't demand respect. It simply makes respect the only reasonable response. The plane taxied to the gate. Passengers stood, grabbed bags, rushed toward whatever came next. James waited. Let them go. No hurry, no urgency. He had time. He had resources. He had the rest of his life to make sure what happened to him never happened to anyone else. And he had his mother's voice, clear as crystal, echoing across the years. Baby, you did good. You stayed true. That's all I ever asked. James stood, grabbed his backpack, walked off the plane into the rest of his life. Behind him, the seat was empty. The plane was empty. The moment was over, but the impact would ripple forward for generations. Some fights you win by winning. Some fights you win by refusing to lose yourself in the process. James Robinson had fought both kinds and won both ways, the only way that mattered.